Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast, where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. For the 200th time,
Woo-hoo.
I am Aaron.
Oh, man, I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 200th time. As you know, each week we'll bring something new to the table, discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Damien, you're up this week.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table for our 200th episode?
I feel so special. This is awesome. Congratulations to you, my friend.
Congratulations to you.
All right.
We've done it.
We've done it.
This is it, the end, right?
The world or
maybe.
us? Sorry, folks.
You never know.
We're back. So it's our
Are we?
Yeah, it's our 200th episode. We're excited.
That seems premature to say that we're back. I'm going to say it. You know. Welcome to episode 200. We're unhinged.
Clearly, we are recording this a little late. I have brought a piece from Waging Nonviolence to the table for us today. The piece is called "What Would a General Strike in the U.S. Actually Look Like?" And it was written by Jeremy Brecher, who is an author and labor activist. He's written several books, including The Green New Deal from Below, In the Name of Democracy, and Strike, with the exclamation point, among quite a few others. He also co-founded an organization called the Labor Network for Sustainability. And in their own words, they are working to build a powerful labor climate movement that's focused on fighting for an ecologically sustainable and economically just future, which is pretty awesome. But so the piece that we read for today is all about this idea and strategy of a general countrywide strike or mass disruption in response to our current political moment. So Jeremy opened the piece with the following quote, which I think will set us up pretty well for our conversation. So he says, quote, "Something is in the air, a perception that American democracy and livable conditions for working people may only be saved by the kind of large-scale, nonviolent direct action variously called general strikes, political strikes, or as I will refer to them, social strikes. Calls for mass disruptive action are coming from unlikely places, like Anthony Romero, executive director of the ACLU, an organization normally associated with legal action through the courts. When Romero was asked in a recent interview what would happen if the Trump administration systemically defied the courts, he replied, quote, "Then we've got to take to the streets in a different way. We've got to shut down this country," end quote. So, yeah, this idea of social strikes, as Jeremy refers to them, is a pretty intriguing one, I think. I'm so excited to talk about this and really everything that we learned from this really incredible piece. So let's get into it for the 200th time, my friend. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, this was a great overview of social strikes. I hadn't heard them called a social strike before,
same.
but I really appreciated that context. And also linking political in general and social as related tactics, I think is helpful and intriguing.
I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard people calling for a general strike online for a few years now, particularly as it became clear that the U.S. government was supporting Israel's genocide in Gaza,
Right.
which was, of course, happening in the wake of growing inequality and all of us watching the super wealthy get even wealthier at our expense throughout the pandemic. And, now we're seeing the Trump regime push more and more fascist policies after 4 years of the Joe Biden administration changing course a little bit, but not really changing course much, and having Trump for 4 years before that. So
Right.
there's a lot of things that I think are building, and he says that anger is a necessary ingredient for these kind of strikes, these kinds of actions, and I think that we see some of that anger really starting to build.
100%.
And, he said that something in the air piece that you mentioned. I think that feels very accurate.
Yes.
And I also really appreciate that quote from Anthony Romero. And I think it's really important because we're seeing a huge nonprofit organization, best known, as they said, for fighting for civil liberties within the context of the court system.
Right.
This is very much an organization trying to expand rights to everyone and make the current system work. They're not like radical.
They're not radical.
Trying to reshape how fundamentally reshape things. They think that generally this is pretty good and we can make it work better for people.
Yes.
Which we need those kind of people in this system.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
And yet here they are.
And yet here he is. Like, this means that he clearly sees the real threat that this Trump regime poses to the structures of this government, the courts, and all of it, which means he's calling for that real action outside, the shutting down the country, being in the streets, because he knows that the structures could fail.
Yes.
He sees the path that I think the Trump regime sees.
Yes.
And he knows that there has to be
right.
recourse.
They could fail, or they could just be outright, ignored.
Yeah, which I think that's what I mean by failure. And it's a catastrophic failure of the Constitution.
Yes.
If it just gets ignored. And I think that's a big sign to me about where we're at. We've been talking about that here on the podcast for a while now. Not quite 200 full episodes, but a lot of those, I think. And I think it's something to say that the big organizations like the ACLU are seeing it too. And they know that they might not be the ones to be able to address it all.
Yes.
So they're saying we're going to need additional tactics. It can't just be us in the courts, because if they ignore the courts, what do we do then?
What do we do?
Yeah.
What do we left with?
This is our path. This is what we know how to do. We don't necessarily know how to do the other stuff. And so we need additional support. We need to be out in the streets. We got to shut the country down if this is a thing that they do all of the time. Which
absolutely
feels like we're going down that path.
It does. It does, unfortunately. Yeah, I think that was such a fitting way to open this piece. And really, to me, once I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, if the ACLU is saying this, that should be alarm bells for all of us. So yeah, I appreciate that analysis there, my friend. It was also really fascinating to me to learn how this strategy of general strikes or social strikes has taken place in the United States in the past, right? Because it's always helpful to learn from history and to learn from our predecessors and what they did to fight back and to help set the context for what's possible. So Jeremy shared this in the piece. Quote, the closest the U.S. has come to a national general strike was in 1886, when a strike for the 8-hour day became a general strike in Chicago and some other locations. Since then, there have been a handful of general strikes in individual cities. For example, the Seattle General Strike in 1919 and the general strikes in Oakland and Stamford, Connecticut in 1946. They have all been sympathetic strikes to support particular groups of workers in struggles with their employers. So then a little bit later on, he goes on to say, quote, in recent decades, the use of the terms strike and general strike has often been broadened beyond workers' withdrawal of labor power to other forms of direct action, such as student strikes and general popular uprisings. There has been some complaint that this broader usage misses the unique power that results from workers' ability to halt production through their withdrawal of their labor power. But the term general strike continues to be widely used for actions that may include striking unions, but are based on a wider set of actors, tactics, and objectives. An example of the general strike was initiated by the Occupy Wall Street movement. In December 2011, Occupy Los Angeles proposed a general strike on May 1st, quote, for migrant rights, jobs for all, a moratorium on foreclosures and peace, and to recognize housing, education, and healthcare as human rights, end quote. Occupy Wall Street in New York echoed with a call for, quote, a day without the 99%, general strike, and no work, no school, no housework, no shopping, end quote. On May Day, thousands engaged in such protests in dozens of cities, including New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Oakland, and Seattle. Several resulted in street battles and tear gassing by police. And so again, I just think all of that is really helpful context for what's possible as we think about this strategy and how it can be used. And all of that also really made me think about what we saw in this country and really across the world, actually, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder in 2020. As we think about popular uprisings, I think that was another example of this strategy at work as well. So for me, it was just great to have that context for helping me wrap my head around what the strategy is and, again, what's possible.
Yeah, and I also, this history here about Occupy Wall Street, particularly the street battles and tear gassing by police, really demonstrates again that the police are here for capital.
Yes,
that's what they're here to do. They were tear gassing people who were striking.
Yes,
right. Ultimately, that's what was happening.
Absolutely,
they were tear gassing people who were striking in opposition to being exploited by this economy.
The system, yeah. Here for
Yeah.
capitalism and also here serving the state.
Right. So I think that's an important piece that really stuck out as you read
Yes.
that. But I think there's some really great examples here, and I appreciate the way he talks about the history, but also how we're slowly building up capacity for something like a social strike, like
Yes.
a general strike. You mentioned May Day in the context of Occupy Wall Street. And I also wanted to highlight and talk a little bit about this year's May Day
Yes.
strong actions that happened just a few days ago. This was a coalition effort by an organization called Mayday Strong. And so there were over 200 organizations who joined in to help organize actions. There were
Yes.
over 1,000 actions across 800 cities and towns in the United States. Organizations like Mayday Strong are the ones who are helping to build the skills of people across the country to organize in their communities and workplaces, because these actions translate into other things.
Yes.
Because you never know. I saw Miriam Kaba talk about on Blue Sky the importance of protests because people find each other.
Yes.
And then you
Oh,
never
yes.
know what kind of thing is going to come out of
Yeah,
that.
what sparks from that?
Out of
Absolutely.
that connection. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. 1,000 events, over 1,000 events and actions across 800 cities and towns. How many connections does that yield?
Yes.
How many more things or initiatives or protests or campaigns or whatever does that create? And
Yes.
I think this is the kind of work that helps us get closer to bigger social strikes.
Absolutely. Well, it also makes me think about, I said that Jeremy uses the term actors to the number of actors and folks there, but also just the political education that's taking place
Yeah.
in all of these cities and towns across the country and what that learning will yield for us as well. Yeah, it was really great to watch Instagram on May Day and to see just a litany of pictures of strikes all across the country. It was so inspiring to see and made me really proud of the community and the organizing that's been happening, to meet this moment. Yeah. We talked a little bit about, the police responding. And so one of the other things I appreciated in this piece was just the reminder that this kind of mass action will certainly be met with resistance and with violence from the current administration and its supporters and, all of its tentacles. And so the key here, I think, is that it's important to go into planning for and executing a general strike or a social strike with eyes wide open, if you will. So one of the things that Jeremy says about this is, quote, "We should think of social strikes not as ends in themselves, but as one possible means to build the movement that will be necessary to overcome MAGA tyranny. Vigilante violence, police and military action, abductions, persecutions, prosecutions, slanders, and similar tactics are part of the normal playbook of authoritarians in power. Social strikes will surely be met by such repression. If people have the necessary courage, they can not only stand up to such repression, they can use political jiu-jitsu to define such repression as proof of the authoritarian, anti-democratic character of those perpetrating it." And I think one of the other potential takeaways from that idea of the repressive tactics that the state will employ is proof that we've got an authoritarian government is that the repression will only open more people's eyes to it, and to the fact that the administration will clearly stop at nothing to get what it wants. And we have seen that week in and week out in these first few months of this administration and these first 100+ days of this administration. So I think that hopefully will lend itself to garnering more momentum for the type of resistance that will be necessary to meet this moment. But it's certainly also a good caution that he provides here.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Is the paying attention to what the backlash is. and
Absolutely.
how that can be harnessed also.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's this quote from Sarah Nelson, who is the head of the National Association of Flight Attendants, that connects to why the Trump regime and Elon Musk and Doge, which, Jamel Bowie was doing a video about Doge, and I watched him, and he said, "I hate saying that." And I just was, yes.
I didn't see that.
Me
That's
too.
great. Yes.
So, yeah. Anyway, every time I think of that, I think of that video, the clip of Jamel Bouie being like, "This is so dumb."
Yeah, I love that.
So anyway, this quote from Sarah Nelson connects to why Trump and Musk have been targeting federal workers for their so-called efficiency efforts. So the quote is in the context of a planned strike due to a government shutdown back in 2019. So this strike was planned because of how workers had been impacted by that shutdown.
Right.
So Sarah said very succinctly, "Our country doesn't run without the federal workers who make it run."
Yes.
And that's super obvious. It's an important statement to make because none of the things work without the federal workers. You think about the flight attendants, you think then my mind goes right to air traffic controllers,
Yep.
and we have seen how important they
Yes.
are and their job is. And you know, it's just so obvious that things don't work unless we have people to make them work. And that feels like common sense. And at the same time, it seems to be a common sense that is under attack.
Yes.
And so it's not, I guess it's not that common. I don't know. Welcome to the uncommon sense portion of the show. That's a new segment we should start.
Oh, boy.
Starting episode 201, Uncommon Sense.
There's plenty of examples of it for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, no, I loved that quote and
Yeah.
really succinctly sort of names what the reality is, but what seemingly has been lost in these past 100 some odd days. So yeah, I love that. All right, well, this feels like a really good place to shift our conversation to the application portion of our show, which you've been with us for 200 episodes. You know what this is. How does this piece and our conversation about it apply to our everyday lives and work? I really appreciated the list of reasons that Jeremy offered for why this idea of a mass action like a general strike is becoming more and more appealing to folks. And I think they are also the path to us getting there. So the reasons are, quote, one, the wide range of people being harmed by the MAGA juggernaut gives credibility to actions based on wide public participation. Two, the demolition of key institutions of democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law is threatening to leave few alternatives to popular uprising. And three, the fecklessness of the leadership of the Democratic Party, as sublimely illustrated by Senator Chuck Schumer's passage in March of the devastating MAGA budget, has led to despair about resistance within the institutions of government.
Yeah.
And he closed all of that out with this statement. He says, quote, "These inescapable realities are forcing people to think in unaccustomed ways." And so all of that, all of this is my application. I think we are, without a doubt, in a moment where major action needs to happen. It needs to be taken in order to actually meet the moment that we're in and hopefully overcome it. At one point, in fact, he refers to the strategy of a general strike as, quote, "a staple of the radical toolkit." And while I think there could be some folks out there who see this as radical, I think we're definitely at a point where radical is just exactly what we need.
Yeah, because radical, as we know from Dr. Angela Davis, radical
Yes.
means grasping at the root.
Yes.
And when you're faced with an authoritarian, tyrannical regime, you have to grasp it at the root.
Yes.
Because otherwise it just grows back.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, we need to be radical because they are radically trying to alter the way that the government functions and radically alter their bottom line, as in multiplying it exponentially as much as they can. So, yeah, we need to be radical. And what?
And love that.
So?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Well, my application comes from toward the end of this article. You actually talked about this a little bit already, but I wanted to add a different piece on it because I thought about something specific when I read it. And so he's talking about the potential of the impact of a social strike and the kind of backlash that there will be.
Right.
So you mentioned this already. I'm going to use one piece of this quote. "If people have the necessary courage, they can not only stand up to such repression, they can use political jujitsu to define such repression as proof of the authoritarian, anti-democratic character of those perpetuating it."
Right.
And this reminded me of the Children's Crusade that was organized in Birmingham on May 2nd, 1963, because this was planned specifically so that the country and the world could see and would see the kind of repression, authoritarian, segregationist repression that existed in Birmingham and across the South and in different versions across the country
Right.
through what was happening to children specifically. And I think that that is a very particular moment in the Southern freedom movement and civil rights movement work that they took that they did political jujitsu, as Jeremy talks about, and flipped the narrative around and be like, look, this proves what we've been talking about.
Yes.
There's dogs chasing children. There's fire hoses turned on children.
Yep.
What else do you need? Look at this.
Yeah.
And I think there are moments like that throughout history. That's the one that I thought of in this moment. And then he goes on to close this article talking about social strikes and their power. And he says, quote, such actions are unlikely until there is widespread anger, mass mobilization, and willingness to take serious risks. But they can be part of our strategic horizon. Such actions demonstrate that no matter what tyrants may do, ultimately the people have the means to defeat them.
Yes.
And I just want to echo that last part. No matter what tyrants may do, the people have the means to defeat them.
I love that. Great way to close this piece. Absolutely. And great example there from Birmingham. I love that. All right, folks, let's talk about homework. What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work once we leave this table today? This was a really great piece. Obviously, you can tell we've enjoyed it. It makes me want to read more of Jeremy's work. I mentioned earlier that he's written several books, so I'll name them again: The Green New Deal from Below, In the Name of Democracy, and Strike. And so I want to check those out and see if there's one or more or all of them to add to our very long list of books to read. He's also written quite a few other pieces for Waging Nonviolence that would be certainly nice to check out. I also definitely want to check out the Labor Network for Sustainability organization that he co-founded that I mentioned at the top. They've published a lot of great resources that might also be good for us to learn from here on the podcast. So I'm just going to dig into Jeremy's work.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, that's good stuff. I want to learn more about that organization as well, the Labor Network. So my homework comes from an article that's linked in this article. It's also on Waging Nonviolence. It's about the protests in South Korea that ultimately ousted the president there who was trying to grab power. And it's called What the U.S. Can Learn from South Koreans Who Stopped an Authoritarian Power Grab.
Yes.
So I want to read that and learn more about what was going on there and how that work was ultimately successful in removing an authoritarian who's trying to really dig his claws into what is a democratic republic, as far as I know. So, yeah, what does that look like in terms of their response to that and how they were able to be ultimately successful in getting rid of a wannabe despot?
That would be amazing to read and to learn from because it sounds familiar. Yeah, very good. Well, that is it for our conversation today about this great piece from Waging Nonviolence, and what a great way to shout out and just live in our 200th episode with this great piece. Yes, I love it. Thanks for being with us, friends, for 200 episodes. We so appreciate you. Aaron, my friend, you're up next time. What are you bringing to the table in our 201st episode? Maybe we just keep celebrating that.
Yeah. This is 201.
Yes.
Just get excited. For episode 201, I'm bringing episode 2 of Eyes on the Prize 3.
Oh, great.
Which is called Trapped. And it's set between 1989 and 1995. And the description of the episode is, quote, public defenders and organizers sound the alarm against the disproportionate impacts of the criminal justice system on the Black community. So that makes a lot of sense. That's what this period is about, because it's in the midst of Reagan's war on drugs. And this also leads right up to the 1994 crime bill and goes a little bit after it. And, if the first episode of this series is any indication, this will be a great episode for us to watch, and we'll also provide lots for us to talk about here next week.
Absolutely. Yeah, that first episode was great. So I'm glad you remembered to keep us on task and to keep us watching this. So I'm very excited for that. Very good. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.